Dr. Chatterjee is the Senior Vice President of Clinical Research at Aurobindo Pharmaceuticals. He's graduated from the Christian Medical College in Vellore and postgraduate training at the National Institutes of Mental Health in Bangalore. Has a postgraduate certificate in management. And before joining the current institution, or Aurobindo, he served in various capacities at Panacea Biotech and Dr. Reddy's Laboratory. A multitude of World Health Organization experiences, including in the global polio eradication campaign, several regulatory interactions, not just in the United States, but in Germany, Brazil, New Zealand, Serbia, and you name it. And he has been honored, in fact, in 2012 by the Charles Shepherd Award, awarded by the CDC in Atlanta. So the presentation is titled COVID-19 and Breakthrough Innovation in Clinical Research. Let's hear from you, Dr. Chatterjee.
Good morning, everyone. At the outset, let me thank Precision Evolution Global for inviting me to speak at the Precision in Clinical Trials Virtual Summit East Coast. It's a pleasure to be participating in this event. Which I'm going to cover today is COVID-19 and breakthrough innovation in clinical research and trials over the next 20 to 25 minutes. So this is just a look at the surge in clinical activity since the beginning of the pandemic, which matches the global spread of the disease itself. And if we look at the number of clinical trials on COVID alone, the latest count is 5,619, of which 312 are vaccine studies, 1,653 are drug studies, and 3,654 are other studies. So that's a lot of studies, and then there are also studies going on in other therapeutic areas as they used to before the pandemic. And all that has become very challenging in context of the pandemic for many reasons. One is the burden on the healthcare professionals and also the risk to them while conducting clinical trials during this time. Then getting access to the patient pool or volunteer cohort. Then the operational aspects like monitoring of clinical trials is very important to ensure data integrity. That has become a challenge. And on the logistics side, there is the challenge of the interruption of supply chain. These are among a few of the challenges faced in conducting research during this pandemic. And this disruption to clinical operations is caused because of social distancing and also point of care disruption. Examples being new sites and patient recruitment is generally on hold except for key focus areas. And existing trials are continuing with modifications where necessary to ensure continuity. So how is the industry and academia engaged in clinical trials coping up with these challenges? There have been a lot of innovative approaches that have been adopted in the past year to ensure that clinical trials can continue to be done and novel therapeutics, prophylactics, diagnostics are commercialized so that they can benefit both COVID patients and also other therapeutic areas. Now, the first thing that this has resulted in is a tremendous amount of collaboration, where biopharma companies are partnering with government bodies, NGOs, academics, and each other to share resources. And few examples of this: the National Institute of Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation COVID-19 Therapeutics Accelerator, and the World Health Organization Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. There are also an increasing number of partnerships in R&D alliances and licensing deals, with bodies such as BARDA, CP also funding early research. This is a network of the International Science Foundation on COVID-19 biomedical research from January to November 2020, 11 months, with the 4 colors representing 4 continents, namely the North America, Europe, Asia, and South America. And you can see there are so many networks here, which shows the degree of collaboration that has fostered between the international community. Then this conference had a dedicated track, decentralized trials. So that has been another approach in accelerating the uptake of clinical trial innovation. Because decentralized trials offer the potential to continue clinical research by moving the point of care from centralized to a decentralized in a hub and spoke model. Although there are relatively few trials which have adopted this approach, but interest is growing and sparked by COVID-19. And the digital and virtual innovations within clinical trials include online consent forms tied to electronic health records, decentralized care including mobile clinics, patient-reported outcomes, electronic and wearables, then telemedicine for remote patient monitoring and real-time tracking of clinical trials. And these steps have a wide-ranging benefits which include cost, time, convenience, diversity, and resilience to the disruption caused by COVID-19. Another approach which has found its entry in the conduct of clinical trials is the concept of action trials. These trials can test multiple drugs simultaneously in the hopes of quickly determining which ones work best. This is a truly novel approach because traditionally clinical trials only focus on testing either one drug or a combination of regime. But this is different from that. And the first of them was the University of Oxford trial, which tested multiple treatments for COVID, including the anti-malarial hydroxychloroquine, HIV protease inhibitors, lopinavir and ritonavir, and the steroid dexamethasone, which in fact was found to be beneficial. In the US, the North Carolina-based Wake Forest Baptist Health was the country's first hospital to enroll patients in a platform trial. And there is also a University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, which is conducting a COVID-19 platform trial evaluating different therapeutic options. So as I mentioned, the traditional trials evaluate whether a single experimental treatment improves patient outcomes compared to a placebo or existing standard of care. So this method has been practiced since the beginning because it is scientifically sound. But it also happens to be quite inefficient because each trial requires its own funding sources, collaborating physicians and patients. And it is also difficult to make head-to-head comparisons about which drug works best. In platform trials, on the other hand, researchers test multiple interventions simultaneously. And the most promising candidates move on to the next stage of the trial, while treatments that do not perform well get dropped. Therefore, researchers can also introduce new potential treatments at each phase. So these trials are quicker, use fewer participants, require fewer patients to receive either a placebo or the standard of care as part of the control group, and also allows for head-to-head comparison. Thus, they provide high-quality evidence without a large participant pool and at a lower cost than standard trials. There has also been a dedicated track on virtual clinical trials. So this is another approach which has come up in the wake of the pandemic. Janssen Pharmaceuticals launched 2 entirely virtual clinical trials in the first 3 months of 2020. One of them, the Invokana or canagliflozin heart failure study, had a completely virtual setup, including virtual enrollment, app-guided self-assessment of symptoms, wearable devices for monitoring physical activity, and drop shaping of trial medications, thereby totally eliminating the need for a physical setup of the trial. Next, also there has been a dedicated section on real-world evidence. This is becoming a very important concept and has played a large part in supplementing the clinical trial data that is being generated. And important example is the recovery trial for COVID-19, where data is reported through the National Health Service Digi Trials platform. And this allows investigators to link trial data and real-world evidence in the form of NHS primary and secondary care data sets, giving researchers insights quickly once first-order questions on COVID-19 treatments are established. Then there have been novel approaches which can be called as seamless trials. Now they involve various things. One, adaptive clinical study models, where the sample size or the treatment allocation or the dosage can be modified based on data generated from earlier subjects. In some cases, early testing in humans have been done concurrently with animal testing. This has been possible because of some regulatory reforms as well, with several guidances from FDA and other regulatory bodies on the process of doing clinical trials. Then safety tests have been run simultaneously with efficacy tests, and elements of phase 2 and phase 3 trials have been combined, with the proof of concept cohort immediately followed by pivotal cohort for emergency use authorization. So this is an example of probably the best. So we all know that vaccines normally take 15 years or longer to develop. This is because the design and exploratory preclinical studies take a couple of years. There is also a process development preclinical toxicology studies which take 2 to 4 years. Then an IND is submitted. Clinical trials take 5 to 7 years, of which phase 1 to phase 2 years, and phase 3 2 to 3 years. Then a BLA is submitted, which is followed by regulatory review, etc., taking 1 to 2 years. And then there is a large scale production and distribution. All this has been compressed during the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine development, where the design and exploratory preclinical studies have been completed in months, utilizing pre-existing data from the earlier SARS-CoV and MERS-CoV epidemics. The process development preclinical toxicology studies have also been shortened months based on partially pre-existing data and parallel development. Then following the IND submission, the clinical trials again have been completed in months by overlapping the trial phases and production at risk, that is stockpiling. And once the BLA was submitted, the regulatory review has been completed in as short a time as 1 to 2 months on a rolling basis. so that overall the development timeline has been compressed from 10 months to 1.5 years, which is a 10 times improvement over the standard timeline. And finally, there has been integration of digital technologies. This also has been a dedicated track for the conference. So it's not just about artificial intelligence and machine learning, although that has been an important component. And some examples are the Pfizer Smart Data Query tool used for their vaccine trials, which resulted in exceptional level of data quality and minimum discrepancies to resolve in the final stages. So that the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trial was ready to be reviewed a mere 22 hours after meeting the primary efficacy case counts, whereas normally it can take more than 30 days for the patient data to be cleaned up. Another example is the IQVIA AI/ML based tools and systems used for prioritizing the highest potential sites. Now, this resulted in informed trial operational planning choices to be made, depending on areas where COVID-19 outbreaks were most likely to occur. Some other used to enable clinical trials during this pandemic is to use cloud-based process that allows sites to enter and track pre-screening information. This was used in Lilly in one of their oncology trials. It helps quickly analyze trends in how patients are getting accepted or rejected. And if more patients are being screened out than expected, the company can re-examine and possibly update the enrollment criteria. This has not only helped reduce the time required to enroll patients, but has also informed decisions about where to open new sites for trials. There is also an example of a University of Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and Southern Clinical Trials Unit. It's a COVID-19 drug testing platform called Agile. And it's a clinical trials platform that can test new drugs for COVID-19. So in a way, it's a proof of confidence engine that can treat COVID-19 patients for the first time with promising drugs that have been developed in laboratories around the world. It is capable of testing multiple potential treatments in parallel and speeding up testing by pooling control data across patient groups. So what happens is that you can have a head-to-head comparison of several patient groups with the same control. It is flexible and can test drugs that are suitable for patients newly diagnosed with COVID-19, both at home as well as patients in hospital. And the first drug set to be trialed in Agile is called EIDD2801, which is developed by a US pharmaceutical company called Ridgeback Biotherapeutics and is an oral antiviral drug. So in summary, there have been various key innovation disruptors that have changed the paradigm of doing clinical trials. And this is probably going to affect the way clinical trials are conducted even after the pandemic, where many of the approaches used during this time can be adopted even for trials done in the future. So these include a worldwide priority to increase the speed and accuracy of the drug discovery launch process, regulatory collaboration which has created new guidelines to advance clinical trials for treatment, process acceleration through shared information and technologies which will decrease time constraints during trials, and a stimulating climate of innovation to meet increased speed and accuracy throughout the process. Thank you.
Wonderful. Is there any questions for Dr. Arani? I think he is present. He might be able to answer via text. I know it's a little late in India right now, but if he's here, you guys can definitely reach out to him. We can also share your contact information as well. And yeah, I guess we can then move on to the next session. We had a change in the agenda. Instead of Allison Gage, we now have Dr. Nancy Sacco, who will be speaking about clinical pharmacology. So I guess.
Sounds good to me. Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee.